Nu är det dags för ytterligare ett lärandeexempel med fokus på Irland. Den irländska referensramen är cirka 10 år äldre än SeQF och vi har bjudit in Órla från Qualifications Ireland för att berätta mer om deras erfarenheter med sin referensram. Och Órla kommer att berätta lite om de irländska erfarenheterna och både om utmaningar och om framgångsfaktorer. Kanske är det så att hon också ger oss några medskick för framtiden. Órla, dear Órla, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very happy to be able to learn from your experience with the Irish framework of qualifications. I look forward to having this conversation with you today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Anna. I'm really happy to talk to you.
Good. So let's just jump into our conversation about the frameworks and the Irish experiences. I wanted to start this conversation by asking you about what has been the added value of your framework during the years that it actually been in place?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and a great place to start. I think the first significant benefit of the framework was that it simplified our qualification system. So when we introduced the framework back in 2003, we had quite a fragmented qualifications landscape. And when we adopted the framework, we ensured that every qualification that was already being offered could be explained and understood within our 10-level framework. So it allowed for a rationalization of our qualifications. And I think that simplification and allocation of NFQ levels allowed learners to better understand where their qualification fitted into the qualification system, and it gave them greater visibility of the pathways from one level to another, or from one qualification type to another qualification type. So I think the framework allowed learners to have a better understanding of their education, their qualifications, and it allowed them to take greater ownership of their education journey, because it was much more transparent to them about how all of these qualifications fitted together and how a person navigated the qualification system.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And it's interesting that you talk about learners as sort of almost the main stakeholder in the system. And we are many here in Europe working with qualification frameworks, and we're looking at the Irish example, for instance, when it comes to public awareness. So do people in general know about the framework, and do they use it? And how did you actually achieve that?
This is something we're asked quite a lot. And I think it was surprising to me when I started meeting other European counterparts about how unique it was, about how visible the Irish framework was. We talk in the Irish system about the taxi driver test, where you could get into a taxi and ask the taxi driver about their children and what qualifications they're doing. And the taxi driver will probably use the NFQ level to describe their qualification. And I thought that was normal, but it turns out from talking to colleagues, that's not that normal. And actually a couple of years ago, Anna and some other colleagues were with us in Ireland, and one of our colleagues, Frederica, took on the challenge of asking all of her waiters when she went out for dinner and drinks about their NFQ level, and they also all knew their NFQ level. So it is very well used and understood by learners. NFQ levels are used in conversation. They're used by people to describe their qualifications, just in normal conversation. And I think we've achieved it a couple of ways. I'm really hoping my little artifact will show on camera here. So this is our NFQ. And I think this really simple but kind of colorful and vibrant display of our framework was really integral to our success. These are pinned up in every school in Ireland. So we send them out to guidance counsellors, we send them out to teachers, and they're displayed in schools. So learners see them from the time they're, 12 or 13, so they become really familiar with it. And it's really useful because they're able to chart where they are on it as they achieve their different qualifications. So I think this framework depiction, we call it the FAN, has been really successful in helping people understand and become familiar with the framework. And then I think the other key to our success is that there's been a really huge collaborative effort across education and training in Ireland of everybody adopting the framework. So we have higher education institutions who use framework language to describe their qualifications. Our colleagues in vocational education will do the same. We've seen the NFQ make its way into policy and legislation. So it's been used by so many different people in so many different ways that its visibility has become really predominant in the Irish system. But I think the key to our success was our fan diagram.
That's very interesting. It's nice that you mentioned the dinner. I think that was for your 20th anniversary celebration when we were in Dublin visiting you. And yes, we were having dinner with our Dutch colleagues, and Federica, she was asking everyone about the levels, and everybody could answer. It was quite fascinating, actually. But it's also interesting that you show us your fan. We call it the sun fan, solfjädern in Swedish, because we also use that model. I think many countries have copied you using that model of trying to give an overview of their frameworks. And we've actually revised our fan and introducing a new version of it today. So that's very interesting. Thank you. I also find it very interesting that you talk about the fact that you have actively worked with outreach towards teachers and guidance counselors and so on. And I think that's something that we can learn from as well. So thank you. But, we can talk about the success factors, but it's also interesting to know what your challenges have been. So can you tell us something about what are the challenges that you've had to address so far working with the Irish framework?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Our framework has remained quite static and quite stable for the 23 years that it's existed. So in some ways, we haven't really tackled massive challenges in terms of making changes or explaining the changes to the framework. But I think that level of stability has actually had some negative outcomes in that the framework was introduced in 2003, so over 20 years ago. And at the time, people were really familiar with the framework. We had deep technical knowledge of the framework in our education institutions, people who in their roles were really expert in the NFQ and how it was implemented and how that impacted policies and program design in institutions. But over that 20 years, I think a little bit of complacency has creeped in for us as the Qualifications Authority in terms of how much effort we have put into ongoing communication and promotion of the framework, and then within institutions around maintaining that deep technical knowledge of the framework. So although I think the FAN was really instrumental in its promotion, I think in some ways the framework has been reduced to the FAN, and all of the other information that sits underneath that has been lost a little bit. And that's one of the challenges we're actively working on at the moment, is how we build back up that deep technical knowledge of the framework within institutions, and how we ensure that people who are making decisions about qualifications and programs that lead to qualifications make sure that they really understand the NFQ and how it needs to be implemented.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's something to really perhaps take into account working forward. I do believe that we still have a ways to go for people to really do know and understand the technical details of the framework and so on. Well, anyway, what's next for you then in Ireland to ensure continued trust in the framework and continued added value?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, and it's one of our current strategic priorities, is to future-proof the National Framework of Qualifications as the authoritative source of information about tertiary education qualifications. And I think, as I said, our framework has stayed really stable. And what's been good about that, it has allowed change to happen in the education and training landscape. It has supported kind of evolution and innovation. But some of the challenges are now that our framework don't reflect what's happening in practice. So we've actually just started a large scale review of the National Framework of Qualifications, the first time we've ever done it. So we're really interrogating every aspect of the framework. Do we still need 10 levels? The Irish framework is a little bit unique in the sense that it is a 10-level framework, when many of our European counterparts are 8-level frameworks. And we know that that's okay. We can reference them to each other. We can understand them within each other's contexts. But do we still need 10? Do the qualification types we have, do they still meet the needs of our learners? Do we have a wide enough variety of qualifications types? We're seeing more things like professional doctorates rather than just research doctorates. So do we need to put some rules around professional doctorates in terms of credit volumes, duration, those kind of things to improve consistency? So we're reviewing the framework, we're reviewing our grid of level indicators. I think one of the things we're looking at to allow our framework to evolve, and I think it's something everyone is looking at, is micro-credentials, the hot topic in town. Our framework has accommodated small qualifications since its inception in 2003. But even despite the fact that we had policy that enabled these small qualifications, we're still seeing deviations from the framework and inconsistencies creeping in. So we're now looking at, do we need new policy to support the development of micro-credentials? And then the other big thing we're doing at the moment is looking at our register. So we have an Irish Register of Qualifications that publishes all of the qualifications included in the framework. We're redeveloping the register at the moment so that it will be compliant with the European learning model, because we think there's a real value in using the European learning model to improve the interoperability of data, both within Ireland and into Europe, so that we can continue to publish information to the qualifications dataset register and then also to the database of the European quality assurance results. And I think it's important in Ireland because we have our universities really wanting to work within the European Universities Alliance. They're really keen on European degrees, and the greater interoperability of data we have, the better visibility our qualifications in Ireland will have at national level and international level.
Very interesting. Órla, thank you again for having this conversation with us today. I wanted to wrap it up, so I have one more question for you. And just, shorten to the point, what advice would you give us for the next 10 years of the Swedish qualification framework?
I think my greatest piece of advice is not to underestimate the time and effort that needs to go into maintaining your national framework of qualifications. I've been reading back on some of the papers from our own introduction of the framework in 2003 and some of the evaluations we've done over the last few years. And it's remembering and recognizing that it's never finished and it's always a work in progress. And it committing to that work in progress and working with all of your stakeholders to improve the framework as much as possible. I think one of the key learnings for us as well is that collaboration and partnership are essential to the success of the framework. A qualifications authority can't do this work by itself. It really relies on all of the other actors within the education and training landscape, but also employment and training to ensure that everyone's using the framework, giving it visibility, supporting learners to explain themselves. And then I think some of the stuff that we've really learned from in Ireland is really looking to European policy and leveraging European policy developments to the benefit of our own national framework of qualifications. I think that's been really powerful for us in Ireland and has really allowed us to position ourselves well as we move into some of these European projects, and particularly arising out of the Union of Skills.
Thank you. Thank you again for joining us. A very interesting conversation. We could talk about this topic, you and I, for days and days and days. But this has been a good introduction, I think, to the Irish framework. And I hope that people will be interested in learning more about what you've been doing for the last 23 years, then I think, since inception. So, Órla, I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and best of luck with your conference.
Thank you.